Hi, I'm John Green and I'm one of the product managers at Syniti, and I'd like to take you through a couple of the new features that we've just deployed in versioning and asset endorsement flow. What I'd like to do to start with is just walk through the previous functionality for those that are existing customers to explain how the old way of working used to be around asset management and asset change control. So previously on the knowledge tier, we used to have a single version of an asset, and this was stored within the back end of the knowledge tier, and those asset changes were then tracked via change history over time. So a user could open up an asset, choose to view change history, and they would see all of the changes tracked over time with the individual against those changes. The changing of an asset moved it back to a candidate status. So we had the concept of an asset moving from a candidate through a review process and into accepted, as you can see sort of the process flow diagram below. And that review and approval of a process of an asset, was performed by the assigned sponsors on that asset. So this is the major change as well with the new version. And an asset followed the following review path below. So we have a candidate status asset. So someone has created a new asset in the system or has made a change to an existing asset. And then the sponsors of that asset had the option to send that asset for review. It moved into an in-review status, and then the review process would be sent, or the review notification would be sent to each of the sponsors assigned to that asset. And if any individual sponsor rejected or contested that asset, as we called it, it moved to a contested status and put the asset back into a candidate status, i.e. the ability to make further changes to resolve any of the issues that have been found. The contesting sponsor was also asked to comment on that, and that comment was then saved against the asset as well. And in the current situation, or the previous situation, it required a greater than 51% of sponsors to endorse that asset. So if one asset or sponsor was assigned, then obviously that one approval would move it to approved or accepted status. If two, then both were required, and if three, then two of those three required in that status. What we've introduced with the new version and endorsement model are two capabilities here. So we're moving assets now from that change history. So rather than having a single version of an asset, we are now moving to actually manage by version. And what we have now is the ability to create an asset. It creates a new draft version of that asset. And then after it goes through that review process, it moves to a published status. Once published, that asset becomes immutable, i.e. it cannot be changed. So to change an asset further, you have to start a new draft or a new version, which will be created in that draft status. So a version being created in draft status, and once created, can then be sent for review. The new review capability allows the author of the asset to configure the reviewers that they want to review their asset. So rather than relying on sponsors, we now have the concept of a reviewer within the platform. Currently, the existing review process will be maintained, so the one that we are shipping with the first release will also require the 51% approval of all reviewers in this situation rather than sponsors. In the near future, and hence the asterisk there, we are moving to configurable endorsement workflows, and I'll cover that at the end of this little presentation. Once published, as I stated earlier, that asset becomes immutable, i.e. it cannot be changed, so a version is stored at a point in time, and that version information is stored, and I'll show that. And then if you wish to make changes to that version, you create a new version that starts again in that draft status, and we can repeat the process. One note there, relating an asset to another published asset triggers a new draft version of the asset that you are relating to as well. So the addition of relationships is creating new versions as well of assets. And we do that because we believe that version relationship information is very important to the governance of the overall data assets that you're storing. So the new flow, and I've got a diagram that shows this on the next slide, will create an asset version is created as draft. The asset details are then completed as you would today, and the author now configures the approval flow. So the person who's created the asset, or any author in the system, can then create and configure that approval flow. As I said, with this initial version, the existing version that we are shipping today, the author will select the reviewers that they want to review the asset and indicates if any of these reviewers are mandatory. So again, based on customer feedback, we've been asked to add that capability in so that certain reviewers can be flagged as mandatory. Maybe they play a QA role, or there's an auditor role where they have to be involved in that review process for the asset to become approved or accepted. Author then chooses to review the asset and send that for review, and that's the button they will click. And then reviewers are then notified either in the application itself or via email if they've opted in for email notifications. And it will ask them to endorse or contest the asset. So basically to perform a review of the asset that's there. And then the asset will either move to a contested status if one of the one of the reviewers contests the asset, then it moves that status into that asset into a contested status. And if in this situation, as we ship today, if more than 51% of the reviewers endorse the asset, then it moves to a published and accepted status of the asset. So this is what turns that asset version into an immutable version. And here's a diagram that kind of describes that same process. So the asset version is created in draft. The author configures it, provides the details, and then configures the reviewers that he wants to or she wants to review. The asset moves to in review status. The reviewer then performs that review, or the reviewers do, and if one contests, it moves to contested. If more than 51% review, it moves to accepted. And as it says at the bottom there, if you want to make any changes to an asset, you have to create a new version once it's been published. So you create a new version, it starts in draft again, and you can repeat the process. And if there is obviously any contested nature of an asset, then it removes back to that draft status as well, a candidate for better words. So let's look at that as a demonstration within the actual application. So I'm going to log in to the Syniti knowledge tier, or the knowledge tier component of the Syniti knowledge platform. I'm going to log in with my user. I'm going to log in with this. I'm not using an SSO user in this situation. I'm just using a normal login. But here I'm logging into the platform. And what I'm going to do first up is go and create a new term that I'm going to work through. This is new functionality as well that we're deploying, where it's taking us straight into the asset detail view rather than via the quick add modal, but that's a new feature as well. We'll come to that in another video. So I'm just going to create a demonstration term for this situation, and I'm going to provide a definition as it's a required field, but I'm not going to worry about what details are in there. I can still add sponsors, etc., as was there before, so I can still go and add sponsors to this. I can click OK. I can assign a user to this as well. I'm going to choose my user that I've just logged in with, and I can save that asset. And what you'll now notice is we've now got this new capability here. So now I've saved this, I've created an initial draft version 1 of that asset. There's more details, etc. This was an original version. It's the first time we've created the asset. And now you can see the new endorsement flow capability. So now in the option, rather than looking at the sponsors, etc., or working against that, I've got the ability to configure that approval flow. So now for my reviewers, I can go and choose who that is that I want to indicate. I'm just going to use another couple of my users that I've got set up on the platform, a business admin user and an author user. And I can indicate if one of these is required just by ticking the box. Now, once I've done that, I can either review that and make further changes, or I can send that asset for review. So I'm going to send that for review. And you can see it's now moved to that review status. And I can go and check now to see who has responded, if anyone, to that asset. And no one has, obviously, currently. So what I'm going to do is just log out and log in as one of my other users. And I will get a notification from our notification and workflow system. As you can see here, we've got the little dot indicating there's a new one. And it says here that John Green has moved that term to review. So basically someone wants me to perform a review on that asset. So I'm going to click the view details. And you can see straight away I now get the endorsement. This was here before, but this used to be assigned to our sponsors. We're now assigning this to the reviewer concept. I'm going to endorse that. And now if I view the endorsement flow, I can see that I've endorsed that process. Now we're still in a review status because it has to be greater than 51%. So I'm just going to log in with my business admin user as well and perform that final review just to take you through the process so we can see that moving to a published and an accepted status. So again, because I'm logging in and I'm getting a new notification, again, I could have received this via email, but here I'm going to view details. And I've got the option either to contest, which I could do, and then I would be prompted to fire in a comment against that asset, or I can choose in this situation to further endorse it. And what I will then find is obviously if I came out of the asset and I came back in, or I came back in as the author who'd created that asset, I would get notified basically, and I would see the status change. So what you can see, there's two changes that have happened here. One, the asset has moved to an accepted status, and we can see and review that these are both endorsed, and we can see who was required, etc. through the process. But what we can also see is that the asset has moved to a published status. And I can no longer make changes here. Clicking around, I can't make changes, I can't add categories, I can't add sponsors, etc. So to do that, and just to complete this sort of demonstration, is I would have to create a new version. So for this, new demonstration. So I can create a new version of the asset, and you'll see now we've moved to a version 2. And I can see when that was created, who created it, etc. And I've also got the ability to look at the historic version. So I can switch between my published version and my draft version where I'm going to make changes. And you can see that draft was created. It's immediately moved to a candidate status. And I can go through the same process I just demonstrated to you with the ability to configure the approval through flow, send it for approval, etc. So let's just talk about a little bit about the future as well of what's up next, because as feedback again from our customers was that they don't just want a single endorsement flow. They may require different endorsement processes and different endorsement flows than that we are going to configure and ship today within our product. So what we've got up next, and the development is starting already on this, is the ability to create your own endorsement flows. And this will support multi-stage approval processes. So you can create here maybe a legal flow, maybe a finance approval flow, maybe a data stewardship stage within this process. And these can all be created as separate stages within a single endorsement flow. You'll be able to indicate which are required users. So maybe you'll have a QA or audit department, as I described earlier, where they will be required before that asset can move to an approved status. You don't have to have it, but it's an optional capability. And then you'll be able to specify again the approval thresholds as well. So rather than just our 51% initial shipped rate, you'll be able to define that. You could set it to 100%, you could set it to whatever percentage, etc. you like within the expected number of reviewers that you're going to assign to it. And then you can define deadline dates, etc. as well. When the flow is kicked off, you can define when you want that flow to be completed by, and notifications, etc. will be sent to indicate whether you've missed that deadline or whether you're applying to that, you're hitting that deadline. And the user will be able to select within available endorsement flows. So we're not just going to limit you to a single endorsement flow. There will be multiple endorsement flows once you've configured them, and you can choose which one is the default and which ones are active on the system. So the administrator or business admin has the ability to create these flows for the users. And you can see here on the right-hand side, just one of these flows now being utilized. So you can see rather than just the very simple flow that I originally showed you in the demonstration where we just had reviewers of a single phase, you've now got the ability to define when the dates are for each of these phases. You can see here, or stages as we call it. There's commenting, global audit, legal review, etc. We've got required fields, required users, or reviewers in this process. And we've got approval status thresholds being defined that you can set up. And then you'll be able to send that and configure and send that approval workflow as I demonstrated before. So that completes the demonstration of versioning and endorsement flows, and a little bit of a sneak preview into what's up next with regards to the endorsement flows that we're bringing along. Thank you for your time.